Great. My name is Howard Ebert, and I am an alcoholic. Um, I know Steve said he tries to get the best. I guess there was no other name left in the barrel when he picked me, but I thank you for doing that. Um, I Since there's an awful lot to cover here in a relatively short amount of time, I want to talk about the 12th step in a couple of different ways. The end of chapter 6, Into Action, makes a statement. It says the next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12. Now, while that's true, it's not entirely accurate because it's devoted not to the entirety of step 12, but to only 1/3 of the step. And I believe that there are 3 parts to the 12 steps. So let me explain. Let me just put up a couple of graphics here. And if anyone wants any copies of these graphics, just contact me after the meeting and I'll arrange to get them to you. The 3 parts of step 12. The first part, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, is the greatest promise that we offer to the newcomer. And it's accomplished by reading the doctor's opinion and doing what it says to do in chapters 1 through 6. I'm going to come back to that statement in a moment. But since nothing in this life is free, we've been given a spiritual awakening in step 1 in the first part. And so in the second part, we're being handed a bill. We're being charged with the responsibility to tell others of our experience and to help them to have the same. And the instructions for that are contained largely in chapter 7, Working with Others, which is where we'll be focusing today, and to a great extent, chapter 10, to employers. And we don't have the time to go through all of that. You'll just have to read it and figure that one out yourself. And the third part of the 12th step is the greatest challenge of all, to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And that is accomplished, believe it or not, through reading to wives and the family afterwards. And if you've never read those chapters with that in mind, this may be a new experience for you. And I know I'm not going to be able to get all the way through it, but I can at least give you a taste of what that's about. Let me just go a little further here. And I realize what I'm about to do is a little ridiculous. Let me put it up here and I'll explain why I say that. Because I'm going to talk about grammar. I'm going to try and give a grammar lesson, a grammatical lesson to a bunch of alcoholics. And that's like trying to teach a room full of Labrador retrievers how to rumba. I don't think it's going to be very effective, but I'm going to try it because I think it's important that we understand exactly what the 12th step refers to. Terms like the message and these principles, you hear at meetings, people saying all kinds of things, that it means honesty, open and willing, it means this, that, and the other thing. And if we break it down grammatically, it really only means one thing. This sentence is what's considered a compound complex sentence, which means that it's made up of a subordinate clause, which is the introductory phrase that introduces the subject. And it also contains a predicate. A predicate is, it says something about the subject. And it's separated by these commas. And when they use terms like this and those and them, they're referring to the subject introduced originally. So let's take a look at that. The first part of the 12 steps is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So the subject of the sentence is spiritual awakening. The predicate, what it says about it is it happens as a result of these steps. And then there's a comma, and the first main clause says, and we tried to carry this message. What does this message refer to? The subject introduced in the first part of the sentence, which is spiritual awakening. We tried to carry that message to alcoholics. And then there's a comma, and then there's the coordinating conjunction, a or an, that completes the sentence that says, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. These principles, again, refer to the subject introduced in the first part of the sentence. So the subject of the 12th step is spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And this message is not to be honest, open and willing, go to 90 meetings, 90 days, go all of that stuff. It's not. The message is spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And if we practice these principles in all of our affairs. Let me get this out of the way and introduce you to some other details. The promise that's made in the fourth edition, the forward to the second edition in the fourth edition, claims that from 1939 to 1955, of those, quote, who tried, who wanted the program enough to do exactly what the process requires for its successful consummation, 75% achieved permanent sobriety. Yeah, I use the words permanent sobriety because they do appear in the book, and on at least 5 references, it's there. There is permanent recovery mentioned in this book, and the statement in the second edition says that if you do what the book suggests to do, 75% of us will succeed. In Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, I'm sure a lot of you have this book, Clarence Snyder is quoted on page 261. If you're one of those people like me who's got to know what page, where is it? It's on page 261 of the book. Clarence Snyder says, records show, and I'm glad a lot of you are sitting down for this, records show that 93% of those who came to us never had a drink again. And he further states that the program is the same, the practices are the same, the opportunities are the same. So if you do as the big book says to do, then he says it's the same program that existed in 1939. And if you do that, you will get the same results we got back then. The famous poet Carl Sandburg, who many people don't know, was actually on the AWS board at one point, quoted, he says the following, he says, whenever a civilization or society declines, there's always the one condition present: they forgot where they came from. We forgot where we came from. So what that means to me is that if we are not getting 75%, 93% success rate, and today estimates range between 1 and 10%, if you want to be in that 93, 75% rate, do what it says to do in the book. And the problem with that is we, as a group, as a society, we have an enormous problem with adequately trained sponsors. There's a lot of people sponsoring a lot of people, and a lot of them doing it all different ways, which is why our statistics are where they are. If you want a 93% assurance of staying sober, permanent recovery, do exactly what it says in the book. Stick to the black on the pages. If we do that, the result is guaranteed. Guaranteed. All right, let me get off this soapbox and talk to you about some other things here. I think perhaps no part of our book is more outdated than the beginning of chapter 7. It tells us all kinds of what is now ridiculous things for how to find prospects. Talk to it, go to a doctor, a minister, a priest, go to a hospital. Well, it's not going to be very effective today because of confidentiality laws and HIPAA laws that we have here in this country. So you're not going to be very effective going to any of those people. Go, imagine walking into your doctor and saying, hey, you got a drunk in your file that I can go talk to and sober up. That guy's going to spend his life in court if he gives me an answer to that. So if you want to find somebody to work with today, ignore what it says in the beginning of chapter 7. Go to a meeting. There are people languishing at the back of every meeting you go to, dying of this disease. And we're letting that happen. We're letting them come in and go because we don't grab that person and tell them the promise that exists in the 12th step, but you have to do certain work to do it. And just attending 90 meetings in 90 days is not going to do it. And if you're fresh into this program, then going through the book word for word, line by line from the very beginning is not going to do it either. Contrary to what I do on a weekly basis, which is go through the book word for word, but it takes maybe 40 weeks to get through it. A newcomer has a window of opportunity that is about to slam shut, if he takes that much time to get to the work. So we have to triage newcomers, and we have to get to them and get them busy so that they can get other people busy, and so on. Get them off the bench and into the game, and don't be afraid of scaring them away. Alcohol will bring them back. We can't be afraid of that. We've got to grab those people, and once we do, what do we do then? What do you do when you have your prospect? That brings us to the second part of the 12th step. Practice these principles, to carry this message. How do we do that? Well, I've put together a kind of a direction sheet, because I think the way Bill wrote that chapter is incredible. Not like any other chapter isn't, but he gives us such specific, clear directions for what to do when we work with others. And incidentally, I'm not going to be able to go through all these pages, but if you have your book out, you may want to highlight or note some of these. And if you'd like copies of this, like I said, just send a request right here to the bigbookstudy@aol.com, and I'll send you all of this stuff, so you don't have to write it down. But basically, what we've got here is we have approached our prospect. We got the guy. We're sitting down with him. Forget about whether the family called us in or anything. You're sitting with the prospect. What does Bill tell you to do? First of all, don't start out as an evangelist or reformer. That's not what we're here to do. The first thing we need to do with the newcomer is on page 90. Bill says, find out all you can about the newcomer. And you know what that means to me? It doesn't mean where you were born, how many kids in your family, what religion you are. The first thing I need to know in the beginning, do you really want to quit? You had enough? Do you want to stop? I'm not going to say to you honestly, sincerely, because that's nonsense. If you asked me that every single time I said yes, if you put a lie detector on me, it would say, yeah, he's telling the truth. He really wants to quit. So I don't do that nonsense. Just ask him, do you want to quit? Have you had enough? We find out that, and then we get an idea of his problems, his behavior, his background, the seriousness of his conditions. We talk to him about God. We let him tell us a little bit about himself so we can put ourselves in his place to see how we would have liked to be approached if we were in his place. And incidentally, we don't have time for it in today's workshop here, but I keep track of how many times Bill uses certain words in the book, and he uses the word approach or references to approach about 30 some odd times. And we keep a list of it in the workshop. So if you'd like a list of the approach references, ask me for that. I'm not going to have a chance to show you that, but we keep track of it. And then he says, don't deal with him while he's very drunk. It doesn't say when he's drunk, because if you're talking to a real alcoholic, he's going to be, or she's going to be, under the influence to some degree at all times. You're never going to get me in a completely sober state. If you do, I'm climbing the walls. All I'm thinking about is getting and using and finding ways and means to get and use more. I don't care anything you have to say. Just stop talking. Give me a few bucks so I can go out and buy something to get high. So basically, these first few things address a certain point. One of the things I love to do in our workshop is we blow up certain myths that exist in AA. And one of those myths is this nonsense of telling a newcomer, shut up and listen. Take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. Now, how am I going to get any information from a guy with a mouth full of cotton? We have to maintain control of the discourse, of the conversation. But we maintain that by asking certain questions and manipulating the guy into certain answers. If he's very drunk and stupid, you're not going to get anywhere. But remember, Bill Wilson was drunk the minute Ebby Thatcher walked into his kitchen, and got more drunk throughout the course of the evening. But he remembered the seed was planted of how Ebby got sober. So when Bill finally had enough a few weeks later and he called his friend up, he said, give me that again. Tell me that little formula you told me that day. So if they're drunk, they'll remember. Very drunk, not likely. Then it says, see your man alone. Also gets very misunderstood, I think, because it's not saying we should go in alone. I prefer to go in with somebody else. I like to take a newcomer who has never done it before and see how this is. It's always helpful to have somebody with you, if not for nothing else. If I walk into a guy's living room and he's sitting on the couch drinking and he's cleaning out his shotgun at the same time, I'm going to want to have somebody in front of me so I could throw him in front of the gun if this guy ever gets upset. Have somebody with you. Don't have a family member. And I think that's what Bill is referring to. He makes several references throughout those few pages about seeing the man without the family present. Encourage him to speak. Wow, how can I do that if we just told him to shut up and listen? Encourage him to speak. If I'm encouraging you to speak, I'm controlling the conversation. And then Bill says, give him a sketch of your drinking career, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. We are trying to establish common footing. We are doing what Dr. Bill did with Dr. Bob. First thing he says, pal, you look like you need a drink. I know what that's like. Let me tell you my story. He didn't beat him over the head with a spiritual solution. That didn't work with anybody he worked with. So we give them a sketch. This is the time for the war stories. This is the one and only time we're supposed to get into that. So the guy could see that he's talking to somebody, like he's looking in the mirror, that he can see himself in us and maybe begin to say, if he could do it, I could do it. Bill says also, be careful not to moralize or lecture. Moralize to me means putting things in terms of black and white, right and wrong, good and bad. So if I'm telling you something I did where it says, tell him about your drinking, I'm not going to say, you know, I did this really bad thing, or I did this really evil thing, or I'm not categorizing it. I'm stating my truth. This is what I did. This is what happened. No junk, no lecture, no moralization. I'm just telling my story. And then it says, describe yourself as an alcoholic, which means the following to me. I just told this guy a story. You see this story I painted right here? This story of my drinking career, this picture, this is a picture of an alcoholic, because that's what I am. I am an alcoholic. And we tell him how baffled we were, how we finally learned that we were sick, that we weren't evil, bad, corrupt people. We weren't immoral people. We had an actual condition, an illness, a malady, my favorite word for it. And then give him an account of your struggles to stop. How many times do we make that commitment not to do it, not to do it? Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink. How I get up in the morning and tell myself, nope, I'm not going to do it. Just get dressed, brush your teeth, get ready to go to work, do all of those things. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to drink. I got to take the dog out, come back in. Nope, I'm not going to drink, not going to do any of that. I put my coat on, I get in the car, I reach in the pocket of my coat, and there's a bottle and a few pills. And without thinking once, I consume them. That's such subtly, that's simply that mental twist that leads to the spree, because once I put it in me, then I no longer have control over it. Show him from your experience how the queer mental condition surrounding the first drink prevents normal functioning of willpower. That is no longer up to me. Once I put that first drink in my system, I may think I'm making a choice for the second or the third or the fourth, but when it comes to alcohol, I've lost the ability to choose, what to control. There's no willpower involved when it comes to that. Don't brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusions. And I always suggest that this is probably a real good time to pose the questions to your prospect that we answered on page 44 at the beginning of We Agnostics, which is basically, have you been able to quit entirely on your own accord? Do you have any control over the amount you take once you start? That's how I knew I was an alcoholic. The answer to those questions will tell him he's an alcoholic. And we have to continue to speak of this as an illness, a fatal malady. We talk about the allergy and the obsession. He says, talk about the conditions of the mind and the body over and over. We're hitting on this mental obsession, which leads to the inability to control. There is no control. What an allergy is, and explain what an allergy really is and what it's not. Because when people told me allergy, I thought that's the biggest crock of shit I ever heard. How can I be allergic to something I consume in such large quantities? So we have to explain to him that an allergy is defined as an abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or beverage. An abnormal reaction. Most people have a few drinks, lines, a few hits, whatever, and you offer them more, and at some point they're going to say, no, thank you. Either I'm going to get sick if I do anymore, or I got to drive, or they'll say the strangest words in the English language. No, thank you. I've had enough. I'm right where I want to be. I never was right where I want to be. I always drank with the expectation of arriving where I wanted to be. If I just had more, just had one more, just have one more. So we continue to explain that to him. Tell him that we have a solution. And this is the point at which hopefully he will ask that $1 million question that I referred to a few minutes ago. And that question is, how'd you do it? How did you get well? I see that I behaved the same way you did. I seem to have the same symptoms, this allergy and obsession that you're talking about. But you haven't had a drink in X amount of time, and I can't seem to get through a day. How did you do that? Well, Bill says, tell him exactly what happened. And what happened is not, I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. I took commitments. I shared. I held my hand up at every meeting. I did all of that. I was a door greeter. No. What happened to me is I accessed a power greater than myself that was able to do for me what I couldn't do for myself. Everything else comes as a result of that. Without that, nothing is possible. No meetings in 90 days, no door greeter, none of that stuff is possible without accessing a power greater than myself who can make all of those things happen. Stress the spiritual feature freely. This is probably a real good time to do something that I wish was done for me back when I came in 1983. When people said God, I thought, religion, this is a cult. I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. Nobody took the time to explain to me the difference between a religion and spirituality, because those are two different things. God doesn't equal religion. God can be in religion and in spirituality. You see, religion's a set of practices. You want to be part of our club? Be it the Jewish club, the Catholic club, the Protestant club, the Buddha club, whatever. You want to be part of our club? These are the practices you have to fulfill. You have to say these prayers, eat these foods, wear these clothes, go to temple on certain days, don't eat this on certain days, observe holidays. You want to be part of the club, do what they tell you to do, and they will tell you what prayer and meditation is. And I got to tell you, I went through a lot of religious training every day after regular school. I had to go to Hebrew school for religious training, and not once in all of those years, 5 years I went after regular school, did anybody ever tell me what meditation was. I came across the word in the books every once in a while, but nobody explained it to me. Well, that's what religion is a set of practices. Spirituality is a set of disciplines. I need to have a discipline for God. It's up to me to define that. I have to have a discipline for prayer and meditation. It's up to me to define that. Nobody's ever going to tell me this is what praying is. This is what meditating is. They may help you find your way to it, but no one will say, you want to be part of AA? This is how you have to pray. This is how you have to meditate. That's not what we do here. And it says, make it emphatic. He doesn't have to agree with your conception. Is that he has to come to a conclusion that makes sense for him. Those spiritual principles that he can live by. It starts out early. How about trying to live by the principle of being a source of harmony and not confusion? As simple as that. You're not sure how to do something, what to do, ask yourself, is this going to create harmony or confusion? As we progress in this process, we begin to ask ourselves some deeper questions. Is it consistent with being tolerant, compassionate, patient, forgiving, humble, with love and goodwill towards my fellow man? Or is it something as simple as, does it express purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love? These are all spiritual principles that we're going to try and live by, but they're all our definition. That's spirituality. Use everyday language. We're not here to quote Latin and anything like that. We're not there to instruct him in religion. Just explain to him in everyday language how we made the self-appraisal and straightened out our past and how we're endeavoring to pass it along to him, and so on and so on. I'm kind of running low on time, so let me just move it up a little bit more. Bill says something on page 94 I love. Disturb him about the question of alcoholism. Look up that disturb in the dictionary. It's defined as to make one uneasy. And that's exactly what we are supposed to be doing. With the newcomer, make him uneasy so he gets busy and does something. He's not going to take that shoe off to take the pebble out without action of removing the shoe. It has to be uncomfortable. It has to be disturbing. And then he'll do that. And I believe it's our job to disturb the person with time too. That guy who sits in the back of the room and has got 10, 20 years and says, look, if they're interested, they'll ask me. He's not really serious about recovery. Look how many times he's been in and out and in and out. I'm not going to waste time on him. If he wants my help, he'll ask him. Well, nowhere in the book does it say that. As I mentioned before, the words approach appear over and over. This is not a become available meeting, fellowship. It is an approach fellowship. And there's something interesting. Sometimes a man's anxious to proceed at once. If right then and there in your first conversation, he wants to proceed, it says maybe not. It may be a mistake. This is taken out of context. On numerous occasions in my life, I've had people say, your own book says not to rush people, that you're not supposed to get them started on the first day. And I open up my book to page 95 and I ask him, is this what you're talking about? Yeah. And I ask him to turn to the page before it, page 94. At the bottom, it says, on your first visit. First visit. If on that first visit he wants to proceed, it doesn't say not to do it. It just says, think about it. Use your own discretion. If he really wants to see it and go through with it and see him again, maybe you should read the book in the interval. When this was written, that was the only way to convey the program. Leave him with the book. Today, I would not only leave him with the book, but I'd say, you know what? There's a meeting I go to tonight at 7 o'clock. I'm going to pick you up at 6:30 and we're going to go to that meeting. Get yourself some coffee, bring your book, bring that book to the meeting, and I'll see you at 6:30. Get him started in this. Encourage him to follow his own conscience. We have no monopoly on God. If he thinks he can do it some other way, mazel tov, go do it some other way. Don't be discouraged if he doesn't respond at once. We know that that doesn't happen all the time. Search out someone else and try again. the closer someone is to us, maybe a family member or a friend, we just want to hold on and we won't let go. And we want to get that guy clean and sober more than he does. And that's not going to work. On the second conversation, he says, if he's prepared to go through with it, start to work. Get busy. Let him know you're available if he wishes to make the decision and tell his story. If he prefers to work with someone else, that's great. You've done your job. You've gotten that guy off the bench and into the game. And on and on and on. We all know that there are 12 steps. There are 12 traditions, and there are 12 concepts. But I bet you didn't know there were 12 inconveniences. If you turn to, in your book, on page 97, I believe we are, 97, there are 12 inconveniences. And if you number these, you'll see that. It says it may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, interruptions to your business. I don't have to go through them all. You know what I'm talking about. Another time you may have to send for the police or the ambulance, and occasionally you have to meet these conditions. These are the 12 inconveniences of 12-step work. If you're going to work with others, and you better, because that's what the 12th step requires you to do. It's not a suggestion. This is something that we are expected to do, a requirement to do. And then it gives us some great advice about letting that guy live in our house and how we should have the family's agreement with that. Again, burn the idea that every man can get well regardless of anyone, that if he does or doesn't get his job or his wife back, or the important thing is that he stays sober. If he puts something in front of his sobriety will go first. Continually can be sober, considerate, and helpful regardless of what anyone else does in his family. If there's a divorce or separation pending, don't rush back. Don't rush in. Bill tells us when the time for living together has come, it'll be apparent to both parties. And again, if you read all of the details here, you'll see what he's referring to. And then around page 100, Bill shifts his focus away from giving us detailed instructions on how to work with that prospect. He now starts to extol the benefits coming to them now that they're spiritually fit. Assuming they're spiritually fit, we can do all sorts of things alcoholics cannot. That's the first condition. You can go anywhere, do anything if you meet two conditions. One, spiritually fit. You've had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Second, you have a legitimate reason for being there. Be sure you're on solid spiritual ground and that your motive is thoroughly good. Don't think of what you can get out of the occasion. Think what you can bring into it. But if you're shaky, stay away. Work with another alcoholic instead. Over and over in our book, it tells us if you want to enhance your relationship with your creator, you want to get closer to your God, there's one way to do it: intensive work with other people. Not going to meetings and sitting around with 20 other guys, one-to-one, nose-to-nose, eye-to-eye, work with others. And it goes on and on. Always remember, practical experience shows that nothing will ensure immunity from drinking as extensive work with other alcoholics. It works when others fail. So carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. And I know we're really running short on time here, and I'm going to try and address something here that I made reference to in the beginning about the third part of the 12th step. Practice these principles. Where is it in the book? If you read these chapters, it's addressed to the wives, it's addressed to family afterwards. Where is it? So I started to read to wives with the intention of finding these principles of success. They had to be there. Bill would not leave us without an explanation of that third part of the 12th step. It has to be there. The whole book is written in a certain manner. You can't just chop off that last part. Well, lo and behold, Bill was true to form, because these principles are there and they're covered in those sections, but it requires very careful reading. So we're going to comb through some of the pages and show you what these principles of success are, so that when you read through it yourself, you can find them. Let me see if I can, here it is. I started out beginning of Two Wives, which is on page 104, and I didn't see anything. And I turned to page 105, 106, and 107, and 108. And I got all the way to 110 and I was finished. I was losing interest because I hadn't found it. It was a good, noble idea, Howard, but just doesn't seem to be there. Those principles of success are just not there. And I turned the page, and the top of page 111 just lit up my day. It said the first principle of success, and it used the terminology I was using. I was looking for the principles of success, and that's exactly the term Bill used. The first principle of success is you should never be angry. Doesn't say not get angry. It says never be angry. And across the top of these sheets, I listed out some of the spiritual principles that I think are expressed throughout those pages. They express tolerance, compassion, patience, forgiveness, humility, goodwill, and love. And if we keep going through this, you'll find more and more. How about share your enthusiasm? Enthusiasm, definition of that is in sync with God. Share that with other people. My sponsor told me the people who maintain permanent sobriety are the people who never lose their enthusiasm. Keep your enthusiasm. Never lose that. It's best not to take part in an argument. Use your energies to promote a better understanding. Be careful not to be resentful. We'll get resentful. Being resentful is a state of mind. And we're not supposed to be doing that. We have a step to help us get out of it. We don't belong staying in it. Continuing, be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. If you want to learn how to disagree with someone, read what Bill tells you on pages 116, 17, and 18. He gives us great advice for how to have a civilized disagreement with somebody that doesn't get ugly. It doesn't get shitty. Avoid disagreement or contention. Practice tolerance, understanding that there are watchwords. Cooperate, never complain. I can go through all of these. We just don't have the time. We're running out. Same thing for the family afterwards. And I'm going to take you all the way to the end of the family afterwards here and go through three things that I think summarize everything that we're doing here. On page 135 are three little statements that I think get turned around, and the definition of it we use for some of the wrong reasons. I call these things the three P's. P's. First things first. The P of that is priorities. Learn priorities. If you have I'm a compulsive list maker. And I always have lists going, and I always prioritize things on that list. What has to be, what must be done now? What can work till tomorrow? For that matter, what could work till the day after tomorrow? But prioritize, first things first. Live and let live. The P there is patience. Remember, he said patience and tolerance. These are our watchwords. This is our code. And easy does it. The P in that is persistence. Now, very often that last one, especially that last one, gets taken out of the book, thrown up on a wall somewhere at a meeting like I've got up there, which you can't see because it's out of his camera range, and use that to justify things like take your time with the steps. It says easy does it. Don't rush into the steps. Take your time. I'm a believer in putting things in context. And I put easy does it back in context. It is in the chapter to the family. It is advising the family to practice a little tolerance with your alcoholic family member. Easy does it. Be grateful he's not drinking. Don't tell that to the drunk. But to the family members, be grateful of what you have. And what you have is somebody who may be disagreeable, but he's on a chart to change. He's going to change eventually. Give him his space and time to do it. And I think I'm pretty much done here in time. I just want to end with a quick story. A young girl with her family spent their family vacation visiting the great cathedrals of Europe. And she was very moved by the beauty and the splendor of the stained glass windows as she stood under them, bathed in light and warmth. So she asked the tour guide, who are those people in the window? And he said, they're the saints. So when that young girl got back to school and the teacher asked her what she did on her vacation, she said, I saw the saints. And when the teacher asked her, who are the saints? That little girl in her magnificent splendor and innocence said, saints, they're the ones who let the light in. Now, I believe, Bill, that God got very tired of seeing us die from this disease. So he set in motion a chain of events working through people here on earth, through saints like Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob and Hank Parkhurst and Fitz Mayo and Dr. Silkworth and Dr. Jung and on and on and on. I could throw names at you, Roland Hazard, for hours. And through those saints, he's let the light in from millions of us. And if he worked through people then, he most certainly works through people today. So he put saints in my life to turn the light on for me when I was in the darkness. And if anything I said here today in any way passes along just the slightest flicker, the slightest glimmer of that light, then I've done what God wants me to do here today. So thank you for having me. Peace.